Welcome to In Pursuit of Truth. This is your host, Sir Patrick Mack. We're back once again, and we got a very important topic to discuss. That is the topic of Hades. So grab your tropical trousers and your coffee, fist bump your neighbors, stretch those hammies, and let's get ready to rumble! All right, first things first, I want to give you a quick update on the channel and why it's relevant to today's video. If you've been following me on Twitter, you might be aware of this already. But the other day, I woke up to my computer doing one of those automatic updates, of which I did not realize I had my computer set to. I didn't want the update, but at this point, I had to go ahead and let it finish. It was already doing its thing. Well, this led to a series of issues. It reset all my drivers. It's reset all my settings. And for the last couple of days, I've basically just been trying to recover. But sadly, something that I have not been able to recover is my connection to my old hard drive, which has everything that I run my show with. All the flash back-sizes, all the let's get pursued, all that kind of stuff is sitting on my hard drive. So I basically have to start over right now. Now, thank you very much to all those of you who have been offering me tech support. I appreciate that. However, I want you to understand I do not live in the United States. I cannot just run down the street and buy a ... We don't have all that kind of stuff here. Don't worry about it. It's cool. I can't just have people come over. I got to deal with what I got to deal with. So it's all good. Thank you very much for all the tech suggestions. But what you're looking at right here is the trailer for Collision with Crisis. This was a follow-up video to another video that we're going to talk about today entitled Connecting a Crisis. And right now it's sitting on a hard drive. It is not finished at all, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to recover it or not. So at the moment, I'm going to have to shelf this and see whether or not I'm going to have to start over or not. Thank you very much for all the suggestions. I'm handling it. I've got people helping me try to handle it, and that's about all I can do right now, which is very little. So what I do want to suggest to you is this video right here entitled Connecting a Crisis. Now, I re-uploaded this back in June of 2018. I've actually uploaded this a couple of times. I may even do it again. I highly suggest this video. It's very relevant to what we're talking about today. This is a deep dive on Hades, on the human trafficking process, what it has to do with shipping companies, adoption agencies. It's a very comprehensive dig. Now, admittedly, it's not one of my most exciting videos, but I do think it's one of my most important videos. I actually wish I had this video back because at the time that I made this video, I knew so little about video editing, and I've learned so much since then. So I kind of wish I had it back so that I could represent it. But there's a lot of important information there. A lot of it is going to become relevant, and we're going to touch on some of it today. So please check this video out if you have not. So as many of you know already, President Trump's nomination for Supreme Court Justice Judge Amy Amy Coney Barrett becoming a really hot topic in the news, and rightfully so for a number of interesting reasons. We do know she's a conservative. We do know that she's a Catholic. We do know that one of her mentors was Justice Scalia, which is another interesting topic on its own. But what I really want to talk about is the criticism of her adoption of 2 children from Haiti. She is a mother of 7. 2 of them come by way of adoption from Haiti. She's also a mother of a special needs child, so naturally her haters hate her. And although I do want to talk a little bit about Barrett, I really want to talk about that criticism right there and the conversation that this is likely to open and the interesting timing of it all. Now, I want to point out a thread here from Dana Houle. I don't know if it's Houle, maybe it's Hooley, former Hill staffer. I would love to know which adoption agency Amy Coney Barrett and her husband used to adopt the 2 children they brought here from Haiti. So, here's a cue. Does the press even investigate details of Barrett's adoptions from Haiti? Some adoptions from Haiti were legit. Many were sketchy as hell. And if press learned they were unethical and maybe illegal adoptions, would they report it? Or not because it involves her children? Would it matter if her kids were scooped up by ultra-religious Americans, or Americans weren't scrupulous intermediaries and the kids were taken when there was a family in Haiti? I don't know. I think it does, but maybe it doesn't or shouldn't. And as you can imagine, there was counter backlash from the right, causing Dana to walk it back a little bit. And that's what I do want to talk about, because this is the topic that it opens up. Here's what I tweeted earlier. I shouldn't have tweeted it, not because there is anything substantively wrong with it, but because it was too easy to misunderstand, to mischaracterize. Yeah, you guys are too stupid to understand what I said. Or used to manipulate the rubes who think I control what the press investigates. As if... Also, anyone getting the vapors at the suggestion that anything untoward might have happened in an adoption from Haiti shouldn't. I'm going to stop right there. All right, look, Dana Houle is a bit of a jerk, but he's not wrong. And to anyone replying Clinton Foundation, yeah, it was horrible. It likely made things worse. Can you see this is my bingo face. Can you see my bingo face right now? If you can't see it, I'm making a bingo face. But as I said, the kids were either adopted legally and ethically, which is more likely, but because of the trauma it would cause them to find out from the press, if some news organization knew the adoption was problematic, it probably couldn't report it. I get it now. So Houle is a humanitarian, and he's just looking out for the kids who had no idea where they came from until he came along, until their mother was nominated for Supreme Court Justice of the United States, and Dana Houle pointed it out. Thanks, Dana! Anyone appalled by this discussion, please act on your outrage. So here comes the virtue signal. And work to pressure your elected officials to push to reunify families separated by ICE, BCP, etc. Kids in cages! And to push for more humane treatment of asylees at the southern border, because they sure won't get support from Amy Coney Barrett. Class act, Dana Houle. Okay, so this knucklehead actually brings up a very important question, and here it is. Would it matter if her kids were scooped up by ultra-religious Americans, or Americans weren't scrupulous intermediaries and the kids were taken when there was family in Haiti? I don't know. Well, we do know. We know from the example of one Laura Silsby, who is the subject of my video entitled Connecting a Crisis. I do hope that you will check that out. It will be linked down below if you're watching on YouTube. But Laura Silsby was caught with multiple kids, escorting them out of Haiti across the border into the Dominican Republic. And she was doing it in the name of this New Life Refuge Foundation, this Christian foundation. So you can see that the ultra-hardcore left, and I'm not talking about your average Democrat, I'm talking about your hardcore, insidious left, right now is trying to project this sort of crazy, ultra-religious American view onto Judge Amy Coney Barrett. After all, she grabbed a kid out of Haiti. She grabbed 2 of them, right? And she's ultra-religious. And so was Laura Silsby. But let me just brush you up a little bit on that story. Check it out.
As the 10 American missionaries arrived in court in Port-au-Prince on Thursday, they believed that they would soon be set free.
We expect that God's will be done. That we will be released. We are looking forward to what God is going to do.
But a Haitian prosecutor decided the accusations against them were serious enough to build a criminal case. He charged them with child kidnapping and criminal association for trying to take 33 children out of the country without the required documentation. The decision came somewhat as a surprise. Haitian officials had floated the idea of sending the missionaries back to the U.S. for fear of overburdening Haiti's crippled judicial system. Now, however, the case is in the hands of an investigative judge based in this building right here behind me. The missionaries are from an Idaho-based Baptist church. Police arrested them last week on Haiti's border with the Dominican Republic as they tried to cross with a busload of children. The missionaries say they were bringing orphaned and abandoned victims of the earthquake to a better life in the Dominican Republic.
The entire team deeply fell in love with these children. They're very, very precious kids that have lost their homes and their families and are so deeply in need of, most of all, God's love and His compassion and just a very nurturing setting.
Thousands of children were orphaned in the earthquake, raising concerns about the possibility of child trafficking. The Haitian government says this is what the missionaries were doing. UNICEF's executive director doesn't call it child trafficking, but she says whatever the missionaries intended to do, they went about it the wrong way.
If children are going to be taken out of the country, they need to have proper documentation and have been through the process properly for adoption and for removal from the country.
Haitian officials say many of the children still have parents, but some of the children may have been handed over voluntarily. Many of the children still have parents, but some of the children may have been handed over voluntarily.
All right, so it's the last line that's very telling, isn't it? Many of these kids have families, and they were still being picked up by these different kinds of agencies and sent off for adoption, usually in a foreign country. So please watch this video, Connecting a Crisis, if you have not already. We go through this in great detail. You can find out about how Laura Silsby and her lawyer was actually convicted of human trafficking. His wife was in jail for human trafficking. You can find out how Bill Clinton helped get her out and how she ended up at AlertSense looking for missing children. You can also find out the real origins of the Pizzagate story as opposed to the mess that the media likes to present to you. And that, my friends, is why this story is so important. Now, we're going to skip around in order a little bit, but I want to start you off with those guys' post. 867, this is from March 6, 2018. It might be March 5th for you. And it starts off with a link to a WikiLeaks email. This is an email that was sent from Hillary Rodham Clinton, HROD17. I don't have John to say it, so I just got to say, I know, to Cheryl Mills. And this was regarding an AFP report talking about human trafficking in Haiti. This was back in 2010. This was in the wake of the great earthquake that they had. And this was talking about UNICEF. UNICEF advisor Jean-Luc Legrand talking about how they had 15 cases of children disappearing. So why was Hillary Clinton sending this to Cheryl Mills? Was she just concerned? Could very well be. Those guys say so much is open source. So much left to be connected. Why are the children in Haiti in high demand? Well, we'll answer that really quickly, but if you want to know in great detail, please check out my series, The Bite Part 1 and The Bite Part 2. We go into this in more detail, I believe, in Part 2, but essentially, likely because the darker the skin, the more melanin you can produce. We'll leave it at that for now, but you can watch those videos if you want to know more. How are they smuggled out? Adoption process. Local staging ports friendly to Clinton Foundation. Track donations. Cross against location relative to Haiti. Think logically. The choice to know will be yours. Okay, well, there's a lot of answers to this question, but just for the sake of trying to sum it up quickly right now, how are they smuggled out? Well, it all starts with things like this earthquake, some sort of event. And things like this happen in Haiti all the time, whether it's tsunamis and earthquakes and whatever it might be, typhoons. Well, in the wake of this, you have a whole bunch of displaced families, displaced children, undocumented children. And then you have groups like UNICEF or the UN or the Red Cross or a lot of smaller groups, all kinds of groups that come in under the guise of humanitarianism. Now, some of these are really trying to do some good work. Many are not, and we've found that out over the years, and the Clinton Foundation appeared to be one of them. Another thing I want to remind you is that Hillary Clinton's brother had one of the few exclusive contracts to gold mining out there in Haiti. And of course, if you know anything about gold mining, you know you've got tunnels, and where we have tunnels, we have human trafficking, and that's likely how they dealt with the local staging ports. And of course, a lot of times mining will take you right to shipping, and they had that in control too. Remember, Evergreen Shipping, Hillary Clinton's Secret Service name, Evergreen. And we already know that shipping is a big source of how human trafficking ends up in the USA. Again, we cover this in Connecting a Crisis. Remember also that Ghislaine Maxwell is in charge of this, and this is a big reason why we have these islands like Epstein Island and more out there. And keep in mind that her boyfriend was in charge of scanning many of these ships. And so once they get over to the United States, they end up being put in certain adoption agencies, and we never hear anything more about it. Or they could end up on one of those islands or somewhere down below where we never hear from them again, mostly because no one's looking for them, largely because they're undocumented. And now you can see why the unhinged left wants so desperately to call illegal migrants, or whatever you want to call them, flooding the borders all around the world, undocumented, because if they're undocumented, they serve a purpose to them. In my video Connecting a Crisis, we even talk about a situation involving one of the parents from the Parkland shooting that is involved in one of these adoption agencies. This runs incredibly deep, but that's the gist of it. Now, to many of you who followed this story for a while, this doesn't seem so crazy because you've been talking about it for so long. But if you're not aware of this story, this is going to sound absolutely ludicrous, right? Well, we see in post 3050 from the 13th of March, 2019, a picture of Jeffrey Epstein's temple. And this is really the story to bust it wide open, even though it doesn't feel that way right now. This is the story that introduced the narrative that this sort of thing could even exist to the entire world. And that's a very important thing, and this is why. Down below the picture, you see a link to the flight manifesto. And if you don't have that link, I suggest going to post 3050 and getting it for yourself. But those guys say very clearly, this is not just about sex trafficking. And then we have a 1 in brackets. Will the rich and powerful influence the court to prevent the unsealing? The Tale of Two. Is this a reference to the Tale of Two Cities? Well, it appears to be that way. Number 1 being the sex resort, non-temple, resort only, trafficked and drugged underage girls. And this could be a lot of people. This could be some DC elite. This could be some, music stars or film stars or whatever it might be. There might be a lot of people that are just involved at this kind of level. And then there's that next level, which very well may be the second city, the occult, the worship of evil temple, classified 1 through 99. And then we have Haiti, pray for the victims. So is it possible that Jeffrey Epstein's island was an example of one city and that Haiti might represent yet another? Well, this is all very crazy, but it appears to be looking true. Now, we're going to go to post 1753 from July 29th, 2018. And this appears to be the structure of how this is all unfolding. And this might be important to remember, especially if you're trying to red pill your friends, or simply if you're just trying to debate people who kind of understand that some things are going on, but may not realize how deep this really goes. Remember that although there is occult worship going on, not everybody is involved in that. Probably a lot more than we would like to think, but probably not everybody. And I think that even your average friends on the left, when they're exposed to that, they'll realize that there's something up. But first they have to understand FISA abuse. And that's what this post appears to be all about. Foundation, bottom to top, layers. FISA equals foundation. Well, there's kind of a double meaning there, right? We're also talking about the Clinton Foundation, but FISA is the foundation. Look, you're probably not going to get your friends to understand that half of Hollywood is consuming some sort of material that is made from young children so that they can look younger. That might be a little bit of a tough sell, right? But you can convince them and show them and demonstrate to them that the Obama administration spied on a duly elected president. That's the start. People are more aware of current events, and that's why it's taken so long to pound FISA. If you've been following my channel, we've done this for nearly 2 years, explaining it in and out and in and out, and we're still finding out more, especially now, day by day. Established link. Think criminal illegal acts to prevent or overturn presidential election of POTUS. Well, there was a lot of stuff going on, right? But remember, it was the DNC that funded the research from Fusion GPS, and of course, they were being represented by CrowdStrike, who claimed that the hack was from Russia. You understand how this all works. It was all coming right back to the DNC. But importantly, a lot of this was coming from the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation. Public awareness. Evidence introduced. MSM covert link. Think Sessions, being Jeff Sessions, open statement regarding leak investigations. Yeah, if you'll remember, back in 2017, he was talking about how there weren't going to be any leaks. And that's largely why we thought he wasn't up to anything, because nobody was talking. And that's because nobody was leaking. Frustrating, but that's the way a real investigation should go. If we were hearing details every day, it's because people were leaking. How do you build a home? Well, you have to have a good foundation. Foundation to structure layers. Huber being the prosecutor. We talked about him a great deal a couple years ago too, and then all of a sudden he dropped off the map, and that was probably for good reason. Now everyone's talking about Durham. So is it Huber? Is it Durham? Or is it yet another one of these prosecutors that Sessions appointed? Well, we won't likely find out until something actually happens. But those are the layers: Uranium 1, Iran, human trafficking, Haiti, corruption, etc., etc., logical thinking.
Everyone knows, of course, Hillary's belief that it takes a village, which only makes sense, after all, in places like Haiti, where she's taken a number of them.
Now let's take you to October of 2017, post 9 and 10, starting with 9, projection. Democrats can't lose control over the black population. At some point, the Great Awakening will occur, whereby these false, local, national black leaders are corrupt and paid off to help keep the black population poor and in need. Well, I would look at it this way. Look how much things have changed since George Floyd to now. Which wasn't that long ago, was it? But things have really changed. Black Lives Matter doesn't have that same appeal that they did even just a few months ago. And of course, they've done a lot to damage their reputation. And of course, I don't see the Reverend Al Sharpton anywhere. I don't see Bishop Talbot Swan. Where are you? Where's your words of wisdom right now? How come we don't ever quote these guys? We quote Martin Luther King. We quote Malcolm X. All right, we quote Run DMC. We don't quote these guys. What's up with Benjamin Crump? Right back to Breonna Taylor. Because it didn't work out with George Floyd. Democrats formed the Confederate States against freeing slaves. Democrats formed the KKK. Hillary Rodham Clinton's mentor is who? Robert Byrd. Kleagle and a Clonsel. That's a real thing. Kleagle, look, he's a Kleagle and a Clonsel. What happens if the truth about Haiti is released? Well, what is the truth? What is the truth? Was the truth simply that there was a lot of money being passed around over there that was supposed to be used to build hospitals and buildings and houses and all this great stuff, water pumps and whatever? Instead, bro, who's now passed away, had himself gold mining rights. Very few houses were built, and nearly 50,000 kids were missing. Is that the truth? Or is there more of a truth? And was there a comparison, just like the post I just showed you, to Epstein's Island? Is that a truth? Is that a truth that we're going to see? Do Democrats lose majority of the vote? Yeah, I imagine so. I imagine that's probably what would happen. If it's anything like Epstein Island, I imagine so. through the looking glass. Now, this is a big topic, and I do want to explore this in greater depth at some point very soon, maybe in the near future. But for now, I think we're just referring to one facet of it being the media that we see. They rely on the MSM to keep the narrative going, but tech is entrenching on their controls. Yeah, a lot of those knucklehead assets were stuck behind desks to tell you exactly what's going on in the world, and they're still trying to do that very desperately. And we see that in the ridiculous nature of some of the things that they're putting out. If you're on Twitter and you see some of the ridiculous titles that get passed off every single day, you can see that it's just Hail Mary after Hail Mary. Well, they missed this in 2016 and desperately attempting to censor now due to CIA cash infusions. This will fail. Remember, the FBI and military intelligence have an open investigation into the Clinton Foundation. Yeah, and I actually want to take you back to 2013. Maybe you remember this.
NBC News has obtained documents related to ongoing investigations into some disturbing allegations involving State Department personnel and at least one ambassador. A State Department memo says the ambassador, quote, routinely ditched his protective security detail in order to solicit sexual favors from both prostitutes and minor children. The memo also says a top State Department official directed department investigators to, quote, cease the investigation into the ambassador's conduct. It's just one of what another document describes as, quote, several examples of undue influence from top state officials. On Monday, a State Department spokesperson not confirm specific investigations.
I'm not going to talk about specific cases, but I can say broadly that the notion that we would not vigorously pursue criminal misconduct in any case, is preposterous.
Mark, where are we on this? Is at this point just allegations from one whistleblower? Have they been substantiated in any way?
Well, here's what it is. The whistleblower says that this report, that the internal investigation having to do with how diplomatic security even investigated these allegations, that's where this scathing report came from. It's how the investigators somehow dropped the investigations, including into this ambassador and onto some other deal, including on folks that were part of security detail. So the allegations themselves haven't been fully substantiated by us, but this Inspector General whistleblower believes that the evidence was clear, but the problem was the investigation wasn't done in time to find out for sure if this misconduct was happening.
Okay, you may remember this story from back in 2013. Multiple state officials and at least one ambassador, suggesting that there's a possibility there could have been more. Well, that was U.S. Ambassador to Belgium. His name was Howard Gutman, and he didn't lose his job, accused of soliciting sexual favors from both prostitutes and minor children. Well, he was a big-time Obama supporter, gave him at least $500,000 for his 2008 campaign. And over there in Belgium, he was awarded the Grand Cross in the Order of the Crown. That gives you an idea where his loyalties probably lie. But the thing that I wanted to point out about this guy is that he also represented Susan Rosenberg, who was a former member of the Weather Underground. I have a 3-part series. If you've not seen that, you can learn all about that, entitled Weatherman 1, 2, and 3. But Rosenberg was convicted in the 1981 Brinks robbery. But there you go. Now back to the post number 10. Why did Comey drop this? Well, who knows? Was he in a position where he felt like he had to? Was he being threatened to drop this? Or was he involved with this? Who was the FBI director during the Haiti crisis? Well, that would have been Robert Mueller. And he stood to benefit from a lot of things, right? He stood to benefit from a lot of the deals that went down because of Uranium One. And once again, that was more money being poured into the Clinton Foundation. How many kids disappeared? Well, according to UNICEF, it was around 50,000. It was likely much more, but UNICEF was actually tagging these kids. So around 50,000. How much money sent to Clinton Foundation under disguise of humanitarian relief went to humanitarian aid? Well, who really knows? But it was definitely in the tens of millions. What countries donated big money to Clinton Foundation and why? Well, you had the state of Qatar, you had the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Brunei, but of course, Saudi Arabia. How much was owed by accepting? Hard to really know. Could have been in the tens of millions, could have been the hundreds of millions, could have been in the squillions. When she lost, how would this be repaid? Well, it's got to come from somewhere, right? And so it's going to have to come from slush funds. It's going to have to come from book deals. It's going to have to come from fundraisers. It's going to have to come from all kinds of things. But we had one big source. What did Obama do with cash just prior to leaving office? Well, he stuck it on some pallets and he sent it off. off. And that ended up going to Iran and went to a few different places, and there were multiple denominations. There were Swiss francs, there were euros, there were US dollars. Where was all that money going to? Was this a repayment? Repayment to those who donated for favors and access? Keep in mind, Iran itself was an entire black site that a lot of people were paying to get access to. Again, good people were forced into bed with this evil under personal and family threats. Could you live with yourself helping to cover up such evil, despicable acts if given a safe way out? These people worship Satan. _ some openly show it. Okay, so they're getting right to the point there at the end, aren't they? Now let's go to post number 29 from November 1st, 2017. Some things must remain classified to the very end. North Korea is not being run by Kim. He's an actor in the play. Who is the director? The truth would sound so outrageous that most Americans would riot, revolt, reject, etc. So I'll just let you sit and stew on that. The pedo networks are being dismantled. The child abductions for satanic rituals, i.e. Haiti, and other third world countries are paused, not terminated until players in custody. Okay, so for those who are telling you that everybody's already been arrested and they're rounded up and they're in Gitmo, that's a great thought and everything. But I just want to point out that those guys are saying back in 2017 that it's paused, not terminated until players are in custody. And we pray every single day for God's guidance and direction as we are truly up against pure evil. Okay, so we're doubling down here. We're not just talking about spying. We're not just talking about FISA abuse. We're not just talking about embezzlement. Those guys are straight up saying there are satanic rituals going on. So is that really possible with somebody like the Clintons? Well, let's have a look-see at this recent post, 4789. We got a picture of HRC chilling in her den. Those guys say podcast yesterday, intentional or careless. And they're highlighting a book of art from Lucio Bubaccio. Lucio Bubaccio, Works in Glass, are unparalleled examples of extraordinary Venetian flame technique, a witty play with the borders of kitsch and biblical and carnivalesque iconography. Masterful glass art from Murano. Most of the subjects of Lucio Bubaccio's glass art are provocative and polarizing. At the same time, they're sensual and beguiling in a kind of erotic trance dance, Mephistophelian, and frequently riotous. That sounds like my channel. Nightmarish, fabulous creatures, and mythological phantasms virtually undulate about each other. Hey. It's a family channel, all right? There's no undulating on my channel. No undulating on my channel. We're moving off. You get the idea. It looks a little satanic-y, and yeah, you get the idea. Well, here's another recent piece. This one's called Vaccines of Hope. Sure are a lot of snakes. I don't remember there being snakes involved in the Rona. This is Vaccines of Hope. Looks hopeful. So perhaps it is possible. Now I want to take you over to a great dig from 2018 from Corey's Digs, at Corey's Digs. If you're not following Corey, she does some of the best research on the internet, in my humble opinion. Check this out from April 29, 2018, entitled Clinton's Haitian Black Magic Secret. Some may already be aware of Bill and Hillary Clinton's experience with voodoo from the passage in Bill Clinton's memoir, My Life. However, I don't believe anyone is aware of their dark secret regarding the former president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and his black magic. Did someone say secret? Shh. Surely their story begins long before the 70s when it comes to their lust for power and the dark arts. But this journey begins in 1975 when the Clintons took their first trip to Haiti shortly after they married. Bill Clinton found a particular experience to be the most interesting day of the trip, and he decided to include it in his memoir. Bill, Hillary, and their friend David Edwards had the opportunity to see voodoo in practice in a village near Port-au-Prince. The priest was Max Beauvoir, who had abandoned his career as a chemical engineer when his voodoo priest grandfather died and named him as the successor. Now I'm going to skip you down here. This was potentially the early stages of the Clintons' intrigue into the world of voodoo, and they returned several times to Haiti for voodoo ceremonies and black magic to assist with Bill's elections. This may sound like a contrived story, but this has been confirmed by Haitian officials and priests, in addition to my source, a native of Haiti. It is important to understand that surveys have put the number of voodoo adherents in Haiti as high as 85%, even among the educated classes, and Hungans, a voodoo priests, are even more important in the Haitian capital than psychiatrists are in Washington, D.C. The stories that follow were reported in the Haiti Observateur, but were kept from mainstream news in the U.S. There were a handful of local sources in the U.S. that picked up the story over time. However, there are some interesting details that were not reported, and an event that followed that has not been reported on. And I will link this down for you below because there's a lot of stories. I just want to highlight this one right here. This happened in 1996. The ceremony orchestrated by Aristide for Bill Clinton's re-election was done in Tabar, where Aristide resides with the help of black magic priest Wilton Larison. As customary in black magic ceremonies, sexual acts and orgies are part of the ritual. And during that ceremony, Hillary had sex with Aristide. Oftentimes, these sexual acts lead up to the sacrifice of a baby. In this particular ceremony, I am told a baby was not believed to have been sacrificed. This was not a voodoo ceremony, as the center of the universe for voodoo is at Ville-au-Camp in the northwestern part of Haiti, near the city of Port-de-Paix, where Aristide is not welcome. This was a black magic ceremony, and the Clintons have had powerful black magic priests working for them in Haiti for quite some time. Okay, so if you'd like to know more, please go. Like I said, I will leave this down below for you if you're watching on YouTube, and I'll put it down below for you on Twitter. Please go check out her work at CorysDigs.com or at CorysDigs on Twitter at COREYS. So is there really something satanic going down in Haiti? Well, those guys are implying that there is, and they referenced it like the tale of two cities, right? One was Jeffrey Epstein's island, and the other must be the real big deal. So is it possible that whatever we discover in Haiti is going to be even bigger than what we discovered on Epstein's island? Post 1832 from August 2018. Reread drops regarding Haiti. At some point, it will not be safe for them to walk down the street. Pure evil. How many in Washington and those around the world in power worship the devil? Conspiracy? Fake news? The world is watching. Okay, so those guys are implying that the world is watching, although it doesn't seem like the world is completely woken up to this, right? This seems like a conspiracy theory. It's fake news. At least that's what the MSM is starting to tell you, but at least they're starting to tell you that. They're starting to come out against those guys and people like myself, you, who talk about those guys in the news like this. What are they trying to hide? Are they trying to hide the real deal? The world is watching. So is the world going to see this unfold? What's going on over there in Haiti? Well, we're already seeing it. December of 2019, we saw this. UN peacekeepers in Haiti fathered hundreds of babies, then abandoned their mothers. 10 Haitian women are taking groundbreaking legal action against the UN to establish paternity and make child support claims, reports Sean O'Neill. And some of these kids were as young as 11 years old. That's pedophilia, ladies and gentlemen. That's exactly what that is. And what this does is create a cycle here in Haiti that's always dealing with some sort of disaster, whether it's earthquakes or typhoons or whatever it might be, something to do with poor crops. They really struggle out there. And we get these UN peacekeepers that come in and pull things like this, which just creates hundreds more undocumented children, and the cycle just keeps continuing. And they can keep bringing in their humanitarian groups and keep that cycle going over and over and over. Now I want to share with you this video, and it's a bit lengthy. It's about a 9-minute video, but I do think it's fairly comprehensive in giving you a little bit of the history of Haiti, their politics and their situation, and how it leads us up until now. This is from the Real News Network, and this starts off with an interview from Peter Hallward, who is actually answering some really important questions. He wrote a book known as Damming the Flood, Haiti, Aristide, and the Politics of Containment. Check it out.
The role that journalists tend to be comfortable when they come to talk about Haiti is in the role of the victim. If you ask why are the Haitians so poor and why are they presented then constantly as the poorest nation in the hemisphere and so on, which is true, it is the poorest nation in the hemisphere. It has to do with 3 factors, all of which are a function really of Haiti's independence and the strength of its people. The first is the fact that they became independent by overcoming slavery themselves, and the consequence of that was a war that killed 1/3 of the population, that left the country in ruins, and then left it isolated by an international embargo that was designed to quarantine the country and destroy its economy.
The United States placed a blockade on Haiti immediately after its independence, a blockade that essentially lasted for 60 years. Only after the Emancipation Proclamation here, when it became safe to recognize Haiti as a legitimate country.
Under embargo and the threat of invasion from France, Haiti was forced to pay 150 million gold francs to France for the loss of property, namely slaves. This was eventually reduced to 90 million, the equivalent of more than $21 billion today.
And they were paying that debt off, right through to 1947.
19 of those years were passed under a brutal U.S. military occupation.
15 United States Marines land in Haiti to battle Haitian bandits threatening destruction of American properties.
The voodoo ceremonies in Haiti were against the law, were they?
Yes, they were considered against the law.
But they went on nevertheless?
Yes, they had them all, usually, of course, out in the country away from all officials. Dancing and howling and whooping and various other things. In fact, sometimes it looked like they were very dangerous.
Was the island of Laganal considered a very dangerous post?
Yes, it was considered very dangerous. In fact, they never kept anyone there over 6 months. The people were considered savages and the place very unhealthy.
So a big reason why Haiti's poor has to do with the fact that they fought for their freedom and won it rather than receive it. Second reason is the price the Haitian small farmers in particular, the majority of the population, were forced to pay for refusing to follow a dominant trend in world history, which was the one that saw small farmers pushed off their land in all parts of the world, starting in Europe and later in Europe's colonies, into slums where they could be exploited by industry. And that didn't happen in Haiti until much later than other places because Haitian farmers were determined to resist it. And so that provoked a reaction in the form of a very severe neoliberal plan backed up by extremely violent forms of paramilitary coercion, the army and the tonton macoutes that the Duvalier dictators developed to push this process through. And the result then was, very severe level of exploitation and impoverishment, particularly in the countryside.
And essentially, what he did was orchestrated or oversaw a policy of creating jobs, low-paying jobs, sweatshop jobs, which then facilitate something the export component of the Haitian economy, at the expense of developing the agricultural part of the economy. Now, Haiti had been self-sufficient in rice up until the 1970s, forcing them into these urban areas and trying to find some place to live, building facilities, building homes, living in spaces that shouldn't be inhabited, don't have any, they're very weak in structure. And so this exasperates the situation when you have either a hurricane or you have, in this situation, an earthquake of over 7 points.
When Papa Doc died, his 19-year-old son, known as Baby Doc, replaced him. Baby Doc followed the same principles as his father, as laid out in this 1972 interview with 60 Minutes.
The aim of my government is to increase the volume of foreign investment and at the same time to promote the development of tourism.
He ruled with an iron fist for 15 years before a popular uprising forced him out of office. When the Duvalier dictatorship is mentioned in earthquake coverage, the support they received from Western powers is habitually left out.
So that was the second reason why Haiti's poor. And a third has to do with the political steps that they took to try and fight this neoliberalism precisely by electing a government that could represent a political alternative to neoliberalism. So a popular movement develops in the 1980s to fight this tendency, and it elects a government on an anti-neoliberal agenda in 1990. And the story of Haiti ever since has been really, I think, driven by the measures taken by the international community and by the small Haitian elite to force that government and to force this popular movement into accepting this neoliberal plan that has directly resulted in the impoverishment of the great majority of its people.
This has included US-backed coups against the Aristide government in both 1991 and 2004. In recent years, however, Canada has largely taken over the role of undermining Haitian democracy. This according to Canadian independent journalist and author of Canada in Haiti, Anthony Fenton.
From the moment Aristide was reelected in 2000 until he fled, was kidnapped from Haiti in 2004, Canada played a deliberate role undermining, following in lockstep with U.S. policy, starved it of loans, they starved it of being able to fulfill their democratic mandate. They empowered Haiti's elite, fueled a disinformation campaign, and then in an unprecedented way, Canada played a leadership role as a regional imperial power, propping up an illegitimate regime from 2004 to 2006, imposing the neoliberal agenda that they tried for so long to impose on Haiti. And this is the new face of Canada. This is Canada for the 21st century.
Canada has also supported the post-coup criminalization of the Famille Lavalas party, but it has been the UN, headed by the Brazilian military, that has been largely tasked with policing the social movement.
Its main purpose has been to coerce the population into accepting the consequences of the coup. You've got to remember, the coup in 2004 overthrew a government that had been elected with a massive majority. It had at least 75% or so of the vote. It won 90% of the seats in parliament. And by all credible accounts, that government would remain, and if it could be elected again tomorrow, it would be. So what the UN's main job has been is to provide massive, overwhelming military and police presence to basically force the population into accepting it. And particularly in 2005 and 2006, that's what the UN did. It patrolled Port-au-Prince, treated the population like a hostile force, and on a couple of notorious occasions went in and attacked groups of people who were some of Aristide and Lavalas' most ardent supporters, and killed dozens of them.
In 2009, former U.S. President Bill Clinton took over as the UN's special envoy on Haiti.
And the people of Haiti had an economic development plan that I was helping them to implement, and we're going to go back to it once the smoke clears.
The plan, known as U.S. Hope 2, continues the neoliberal logic of keeping Haiti competitive in textile production. This plan was in action in the summer of 2009 when Haitian President René Préval vetoed a bill that would have raised the minimum wage to $5 per day.
So here's the question. Why can't a country like Haiti catch a break? Go to CNN.com/Cafferty file.
This political and historical story is then recast as a kind of natural condition, as if Haiti is a place that is naturally poor, naturally undemocratic, and so on, when it has precisely been made to be such, in large part by foreign interference.
In 2003, there was a closed-door conference in Montreal, Canada, that brought together representatives from numerous countries to discuss Haiti's future. Not a single Haitian was invited, and Canadian journalist Michel Vastel broke the story that attendees had reached consensus that Aristide had to go. And just over 1 year later, Aristide found himself on a U.S. plane being flown into exile in the Central African Republic. He has not been allowed back to his country since. On Monday, the same countries will be meeting in Montreal once again for the Friends of Haiti conference. AFP reports that the meeting is, quote, expected to affirm the central role of the United States in post-quake Haiti, already illustrated by its massive military presence and relief efforts there. By the time the meeting starts on Monday, 20,000 U.S. troops are expected to be on the ground. Despite recent calls to repay the $21 billion that France extorted from post-revolution Haiti, French President Nicolas Sarkozy joined the chorus in blaming Haiti's misery on the supernatural, saying that Monday's conference should be, quote, a chance to get Haiti once and for all out of the curse it seems to have been stuck with for such a long time. Without either an acknowledgement of the roots of Haiti's poverty, nor a democratic and sovereign Haitian government to oversee reconstruction, one wonders whether the new Haiti can possibly serve the interests of Haitians.
There you go. And I realize that this is lengthy, but I think it's also very important to understand thoroughly what's so important about Haiti. And I'm going to attempt to bring this full circle by taking you to December 23rd, 2017, post 448. This was right around the time POTUS was about to sign his executive order that was removing the funding from any entities that would be engaging in human rights abuse, and that's very important to remember. But again, December 23rd, 2017, and it starts off with this quote from a New York Times article. You may remember this. We were talking about immigration in general, and POTUS was thinking about cracking down, and they were calling it a Muslim ban. It wasn't essentially a Muslim ban, but there were some Muslim countries that were involved, but this was a travel ban. And I think this is going to end up proving itself very relevant. AIDS is trending on Twitter. New York Times ran this story today with sources saying that POTUS said, quote, Haiti had sent 15,000 people. They all have AIDS, he grumbled, according to one person who attended the meeting and another person who was briefed about it by a different person who was there. So you probably remember that story, and now that we look back at it, it may have a little bit different context. Now we're going to read through a few older posts that those guys put into this post 448. The first one goes back to December 4th, and this one says red_red. Remember Hussein AIDS video, Hussein being Barack Hussein in the membrane, Obama. Hussein AIDS video, well, you may remember this video. We're going to talk about it in just a second. Hidden message, response, Twitter, roles, action, expand your thinking, news unlocks meaning. Let's read the next one part first here. This is also from December 4. Re-review red_red stringer. Focus on Hussein AIDS video. Cross-reference. Date of stringer versus video. Learn to decider. News unlocks message, find the keystone. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, and looking back at it, this might make a little bit more sense. Now keep in mind, this is just my way of looking at it, but we were talking about this red stringer, at least they were, right? And this is referring to a couple of different situations, one back in February of 2018 where we saw it in a long stringer, and I'm not going to break it down. I'm not so sure I completely understand it, and it might be a subject for a video in the future, but we saw it again July 30th, 2019. We saw it in a smaller stringer, this hot 8, hot 9, red_y freedom. And again, I'm not going to break these down. I just want to give them to you for reference. And then again, we saw it in the curious post here, 3552, also from July 2019. It might be the 29th for you. I'm in the future, so mine says the 30th, my timestamp. But an Anon had said there's that 1-through99 again. We see that a lot of times with this mention of classified and red_red. Prison, death, class, Gitmo, and then we have underscore, looks like a couple spaces, J, and then we have another stringer. And I'm not going to break that down again, but again, we see this red, and that's what those guys were referencing. And in this post, we saw this video that was included, which looks to be a lot of seized money, and you're watching it right now. As a matter of fact, it is a ton of seized money. Looks like this was all stashed in Red Cross, and as you watch this guy go on, you will see the boxes and boxes of nothing but cash. How about that? Almost like we were just talking about that. Let's go back to the mention of the Hussein AIDS video. Well, what this was this was part of the RED campaign, the fight against AIDS. And this was November of 2017, November 29th. And this was on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. I'm going to show you a couple of screenshots. I can't play you this video because Jimmy Kimmel has hit me with copyright before, so I can't play me some Jimmy. Of course, Jimmy Kimmel, you may remember, just recently humiliated himself on the Emmys just days ago. Well, the scene opens up at an all-red scene, and Jimmy pretends to answer the phone with a can of Coca-Cola, which is also sponsoring this. And he's with the U2 frontman Bono. And he introduces Barack Obama, who goes into a bit of a sales pitch for this AIDS campaign, which seems to be riddled with communication. Now, the first thing that I noticed was that he mentioned that Jimmy Kimmel was not just a host, he's an activist. And he said that Bono is not just a singer and an entertainer, he's a ringleader. And then he gets a slightly strange look on his face as he mentions that he is a father who is yet to do his Christmas shopping, but the RED campaign is going to help him do that by way of a home shopping extravaganza. Well, knowing what we know now with things like the Wayfair situation as of recent, that may take on a different meaning. But without going into too much detail, he seems to be suggesting something coming up, and when he refers to AIDS, he refers to it as a pandemic. Well, we seem to be dealing with a pandemic right now. Was this a signal to put things in place and to send some funding a certain way to help fund this pandemic? Or were they simply just trying to raise money for the people with AIDS out there in Africa? Well, let's go back to 448. This is another past post from December 4. Re-review red stringer. Focus on Hussein AIDS video. Cross-reference. Date of stringer versus video. Learn to Decider. Well, what is Decider? Well, Decider is actually this program that allows you to find out what's all good over there on Netflix. Doesn't Obama have a deal on Netflix? Doesn't Susan Rice have a deal over there on Netflix? A lot of people making coin on Netflix. Great way to send money. You can use Decider. Maybe that's what we're talking about. News unlocks message. We'll find out. Find the Keystone. Now, Keystone's another one of these things like Evergreen. There's a number of things that we could be referring to. I think we're referring to a general idea, but I do want to take you back to a video that I referenced to you earlier in this video, my Byte series 1 and 2. I talked a great deal about the Keystone virus, which is very similar to malaria, and it was being studied by one of the first guys that turned the public on to hydroxychloroquine just recently. This is very similar to malaria, which is actually a parasite. So please watch that video. It will give you a lot of insight. Could this have been a signal for a new virus? After all, they're starting to have a resurgence down there in Florida, which is exactly where this Keystone virus was found. So once again, please check out my series, The Byte 1 and 2, if you'd like to know more about that. Moving on, Red Cross is corrupt and used as a piggy bank. Well, you just saw the cash. Future topic. Diseases created by families in power, population control, and pharma billions KB, huh? Wow. So that's exactly what we're dealing with right now. Think AIDS. Future topic. Well, remember, this was December of 2017. Is it possible that POTUS knew that this virus was coming, this pandemic? And then we had the Fly, Ross, Fly. I don't want to break that down right now because it's kind of a separate topic, but I do think we are referencing a particular satellite that might be trained on Linda Rothschild probably at the time. And then this was the last post referenced. 3,000 plus saved by the raids in Saudi Arabia alone. Worldwide lanes shut down, bottom to top. And then we see Haiti again. Haiti, Red Cross, classified. So whatever is going on in Haiti seems to be a culmination of something really, really big. Classified, high priority. And those guys add coincidence. News unlocks the map. Keep in mind, this was December of 2017.
A leading editor of a paper in the Delaware Valley asked their reporters to come down and talk to me and said, why is Biden so concerned about Bosnia and not about Haiti? Is it because blacks are involved in Haiti? Blacks are what at stake in Haiti, and in Bosnia they are Europeans, whites. There is major arsenals of nuclear weapons where they have long histories of national wars, where ethnicity dominates. That is a phenomenal potential consequence to the United States. If Haiti, a god-awful thing to say, if Haiti just quietly sunk into the Caribbean or rose up 300 feet, it wouldn't matter a whole lot in terms of our interest.
The world
I want to leave you with one last post 1881 from the 15th of August 2018. And the first link is a YouTube link to a video you saw earlier in this video, the arrest of Laura Silsby. And then the article has since been taken down, but this was about Operation Underground Railroad led by Tim Ballard. And the quote is this: child trafficking victims who've spent their formative years servicing the carnal desires of men, often foreigners who were 3, 4, 5, or 6 times their age. Their madam tells me that many of their customers are Western humanitarian workers who've come here to help rebuild Haiti after the recent run of natural disasters. And then we have the phrase, the more you know. And I think many of you know that the more you know is a very famous phrase from NBC. They used to run an old PSA back in the 90s using the term, the more you know, and they're actually bringing that back once again. And then we have this other quote. This is far from a vigilante group. Leading the team is ex-Department of Homeland Security Special Agent Tim Ballard, perhaps America's foremost human trafficking expert. The problem in Haiti is an international crisis, Ballard explains. With so many children displaced or orphaned due to the recent earthquake and hurricane, recruiters moved quickly to sweep these children up. And And the worst part of it all is that in many cases, the clients are the foreigners who've come here to help, the NGO workers and the so-called humanitarians. Okay, well, I just showed you the story with the UN, and this was late in December 2019, but this same thing happened again in 2017. This has been going on for a long time, and as long as Haiti keeps dealing with these disasters, they're going to keep bringing in these NGOs and keeping the cycle going. Pure evil. And then you see in brackets, hunters become the hunted. Okay, so is this a reference to Hunter Biden? It's hard to really say just as of yet. Now we have the story of Joe Biden owning Water Island near Epstein. And of course, this is being debated in the media as to whether or not that's true, but it does appear to be the case. Now, the people that are out leading the fact check fight against that is PolitiFact, led by the Poynter Institute, another George Soros outfit. And we talked about that in my last video. So could that be the reference? Well, it could be, but we also have the more you know reference, suggesting to me that NBC plays some sort of part in this. Whether or not they are simply peddling the narrative on TV, which we already suspect is the case, or whether they actually have a deeper involvement is hard to say, but we keep seeing the reference the more you know. Now, I wanted to show you that NBC just so happens to have a show called Hunters. That's right. After a decorated FBI agent's wife goes missing, he goes on a desperate search to rescue her. His pursuit leads him to a secret government unit assembled to hunt a ruthless group of terrorists composed of shadowy figures that are not of this world. Along the way, he discovers a world he did not know existed and unearths a mind-blowing mystery at the helm of his wife's disappearance. And I can't show you this because it's NBC, but if you look for the Hunters trailer online, it is very suggestive and may give you some deeper meaning to that. But there's another reference to Hunters and NBC. Well, whatever it is, Haiti has long been the object of affection for media, Hollywood, and political sycophants alike. Tons of people pouring tons of money, tens of millions of dollars into the relief for Haiti, and yet Haiti never seems to get any relief. What we do see are repeated situations of human rights abuse, often from the human rights organizations themselves. We see human trafficking, we see sketchy adoption, and we see more and more natural disasters that seem to recycle this whole thing. And like the story that we just showed you in late December, where the UN peacekeepers were leaving all these people pregnant, this repeats the cycle. Well, this obviously seems to be more than just a political issue, although it is also a political issue. Keep in mind that Haiti is essentially the first black republic, and there are a lot of globalists and neoliberals that would like to keep that from happening. That was what actor Danny Glover was talking about back in the day, and it seems to be what Kanye West is talking about right now. He was just recently in Haiti. Now, we don't really know what he was doing there, but he had created a bit of a stir the week before when he visited Jamaica, and he visited reggae singer Buju Banton. He's been around for a long time. Banton has been arrested numerous times for drug trafficking charges. And although I don't want to imply that Kanye West's visit was nefarious, because I'm not really sure, I do think it is a little interesting that he is still with Rockefeller Records and actually showed up with co-founder Kareem Biggs Burke, who has also been arrested for drug trafficking charges. But Kanye West is doing a lot to try and get this narrative out there, and I do think that is very important for people to understand. Because when they realize what's going on in Haiti, they will realize the real racist agenda and how many of these so-called humanitarians are anything but. Keep in mind, you've got actress Angelina Jolie. She's another person that has adopted from Haiti. She also runs an organization that helps assist undocumented migrants with legal fees. You have the case of singer Wyclef Jean, who is from Haiti. He has a charity. They took in millions of dollars back in 2010 and ended up spending millions on themselves, ended up going broke. Or how about Sean Penn, who's been out there in 2010 with his Community Organized Relief Effort, or CORE. And it turned out that he was spending a bunch of money on first-class flights. He's also wrapped up with the Clinton Foundation, as well as Time Magazine, Red Cross. I think you see where this is all going on. UN migration. You also have the situation with Mike Shinoda from the band Linkin Park, who had gotten $250,000 for his sustainable recycling solutions in Haiti. And this was all great. They did a little media blitz where he actually posed with Bill Clinton, and his company did appear to be legit, and there was a lot of media for this up until about 2014. Now, in visiting any of his website links now, it all seems to be shut down, and I have no idea if this organization still even runs. But it was rumored that it was Podesta that actually tapped this to get the grant. And there's a much deeper story there that we'll talk about at another time involving co-singer Chester Bennington, who had a mysterious death not too long after the death of Chris Cornell, who also seemed to know what was going on out there in Haiti. You also have the strange story in December of 2019, right around the same time that the UN peacekeeper story was breaking, of former President Rene Preval, who died about 3 years ago. His home had been raided and they wanted to speak to his wife. Allegedly, there is more corruption yet to uncover, and that will probably be a story for another day, but likely a big story, revealing a much bigger story that we see in such a small country, a country that has received so much attention and yet so little aid. And yet those guys say that once the story is truly revealed, this will affect the black vote. And I would argue that this is going to affect a lot more than that. But whatever it is, it appears to be just as big as the story that we saw uncovered on Epstein Island. That's at least according to those guys, and I tend to agree. But that's all I got for you for now. As always, if you like this video, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support my channel, you can check out the Patreon link down below. This is Sir Patrick Mack, and until next time, stay focused.
I want to make it clear today that my administration will focus on ending the absolutely horrific practice of human trafficking, and I am prepared to bring the full force and weight of our government to the federal and at the federal level and the other highest levels, whatever we can do in order to solve this horrific problem, getting worse, and it's happening in the United States.